Okay, last time we were talking about a little theory of mine that James doesn't literally mean that some of his readers were literally murdering people whom they were jealous of and were trying to get something from those people, and the only way they could get it from them was by murdering them, but that James was alluding to something that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. And again, it bears repetition, there's a lot of clear and maybe implied allusion to the Sermon on the Mount within the Epistle of James. And of course, the early church was doing what Jesus said. He said, go make disciples, teach them to obey all that I've commanded you. And so how can you do that without making reference to the Sermon on the Mount? Okay, so one of the things that Jesus addressed in the Sermon on the Mount was the words that come out of our mouths, which is a main theme in James 3 and now in James 4, and verbally abusing people. And he ties it in with the commandment that forbids murder, one of the 10 commandments. Jesus says, now I'm reading to you from Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 21. You have heard that the ancients were told you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. Whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the hell of fire. So if you get nothing else from that, you get the impression that, wow, God is not just opposed to physical murder, he's opposed to murdering people with our words and, saying derogatory things about them that are meant to hurt and cut them, just the same motivation that the murder has, but maybe to a lesser degree that it's carried forth. That being said, again, this is just my theory. You can take it or leave it. And if you don't agree with me, don't bother writing to me and so forth, because I'm sure there's people that disagree with me, and I hope you still love me. I still love you too. Okay? But when James says, you lust and do not have, so you commit murder, I'm just suggesting that perhaps his readers knew that he was alluding to what Jesus said about words being potentially murderous and so forth. And again, it does fit at the context. The very next verse, you are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. That's after he mentions the murder thing. You'd think to be in the reverse order, progressing from, not as bad to much worse. Fighting and quarreling is not as bad as literally murdering somebody. Okay? But Jesus equated fighting and quarreling with murder in a sense. Right? Right. Nobody can argue with that. Okay, so, this was a problem in the church. It's still a problem in the church today. It's a problem between lots of people in the church. It's a problem between leaders in the church. Leaders in the church fight about all kinds of things. One of the things they fight about is doctrine, and we need to determine what's important and what's not important. And a lot of things that are fought over, and then words are spoken, murderous words that are spoken to those who don't agree with my doctrine or your doctrine. Those things are not important enough to verbally murder our brothers and sisters over, okay? James has already said, how can you bless God and then curse someone who's created in his image? There's a contradiction, he mentioned that in chapter 3, okay? Okay, so this is pretty heavy-duty stuff. And then he goes on in verse number 2, you do not have because you do not ask. Well, that's interesting. He's saying, okay, you've got this envy. Other people have something you want, and so you're fighting, somehow with them in order to get it. You could get it, however, by another means. You could actually ask God for it. Okay? I think that's the clear implication here. You do not have because you don't ask. He's not talking about asking from the people that you're quarreling with. He's talking about asking from God. Hey, Lord, they're your children. You're blessing them. Instead of me getting jealous and envious of them, why don't I go to the source, the one who gave it to them? Right? Right. But then James adds a little caveat here in verse number 3. You ask, I guess you could say, paraphrase, sometimes you actually do ask, because he just said you do not have because you do not ask, but you ask and do not receive. Why? Because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. And there's that word pleasures again that we saw earlier on in this chapter. And so let's paraphrase that. Well, the reason you don't receive is because you're asking purely from a selfish motivation, which is indicative of the problem, the overall problem. You're fighting and quarreling because of your selfishness. Then, the same problem surfaces when you ask God for those things which you want that other people have. You just ask for your own selfish purposes, and so that you can have some pleasure or enjoyment, purely thinking of yourself. And so God says, man, I don't like your motive, and so I'm not going to grant it to you. You think about it. Which prayer is God more likely to answer? Lord, give me $1 million so I can get a yacht and a motorhome and a house on the ocean. Or, Lord, give me $1 million so I can take care of orphans and widows. That's a no-brainer. It's obvious. God is much more open to those unselfish prayers that are a reflection of his desires and not our desires, okay? And James is going to warn in this very next verse that really the whole problem is that you just love the wrong things. It's a reflection of your lack of love for God. Maybe I'll just mention it as we wind this down. Verse 4, you adulteresses, do you not know with friendship with the world is hostility toward God? Reminds me of a verse over in 1 John. John said, do not love the world nor the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Okay, so these are things we'll talk about next time in greater detail so we can examine our lives, make sure we're heading in the right direction. A lot of good stuff, hard-hitting stuff. Okay, can't wait to be with you next time. See you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.